Welcome, friends, to a story that will open your heart and challenge your perspective. Today, we explore an extraordinary moment on a routine flight, when a white woman's refusal to sit next to a black man sets the stage for an inspiring exchange. His powerful response changes everything, leaving an unforgettable message of unity and humanity. Sarah Thompson was never one for spontaneous adventures. At 52, her life had neatly folded into the comfortable, predictable patterns of her small southern town. Her days were usually spent within the confines of local routines and familiar faces. Yet, today was different. As she stepped into the bustling atmosphere of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, a sense of unease shadowed her usual excitement about visiting family in New York. The airport, a sprawling hub of travelers from across the globe, seemed more intimidating than she remembered. Sarah adjusted her light travel bag over her shoulder, feeling the weight of her modest suitcase dragging slightly behind her. She checked her ticket once again, confirming her flight details for the umpteenth time. Her hands felt unusually clammy, her palms pressing the paper as if to ensure it was real. Clad in a modest blue dress paired with simple flats, Sarah's appearance was unassuming. Her silver-streaked hair, usually a vibrant shade of chestnut brown, was neatly tucked behind her ears, giving her a look of poised elegance despite her inner turmoil. Today, she was traveling alone, a fact that brought both a sense of independence and a twinge of loneliness. As Sarah approached the designated gate, her pace slowed. The lines of passengers ahead of her were slowly trickling into the jet bridge, their faces a mosaic of emotions: excitement, exhaustion, anticipation. Sarah's heart pounded slightly faster with each step closer to the aircraft. It wasn't her first flight, but the flutter of nerves made it feel like it could have been. She remembered the conversation with her brother the previous night. He had warned her about the changing world, about how people weren't like they used to be. While Sarah wasn't closed-minded, she found solace in the familiar, in the continuity of her surroundings where people understood her way of life. Yet, here she was, about to embark on a journey that felt as much a crossing of physical distance as a traversal of cultural divides. Now boarding rows 20 to 30. The announcement crackled over the loudspeaker. That was her cue. Sarah stood, smoothed her dress, and joined the queue. Her eyes scanned the crowd, noting the diversity of passengers. It was starkly different from the homogeneity of her hometown. The closer she got to the gate, the more her anxiety seemed to deepen, forming a knot in her stomach that she couldn't quite untangle. As she handed her ticket to the gate agent and walked down the jet bridge, her steps were measured, her breathing deliberate. Entering the plane, she located her seat, 17A, a window seat that she had chosen specifically for its view. Yet, as she approached her row, her heart sank. There, in the aisle seat next to hers, sat a man whose presence was as commanding as it was unexpected. He was tall, well-built, and dressed impeccably in a crisp white shirt paired with dark trousers. His skin, a rich mahogany, stood in stark contrast to his surroundings and, indeed, to Sarah herself. For a moment, she hesitated, her first instinct being to turn around and ask for another seat. She didn't know why she felt this way. It was his size, perhaps, or something else, something unspoken and deeply ingrained. Her gaze flickered back and forth in the cabin, looking for an alternative. But it was a full flight. There were no other seats. With a reluctant nod to herself, she steeled her nerves and took her seat beside the man, her body tensing as she buckled her seatbelt. As she settled in, the man glanced up from the book he was reading, a thick hardcover on global economics, and acknowledged her with a polite nod before returning to his reading. Sarah pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and stared out the window, trying to focus on the landscape outside rather than the discomfort brewing inside her. As the plane began to taxi onto the runway, she felt the old lessons of her upbringing whispering in the back of her mind. The unspoken rules of her small town subtly clashing with the reality of the person seated just beside her. The aircraft hummed steadily as it lifted off the ground, climbing higher into the sky. Sarah gazed out the window, watching the ground shrink away, feeling as though her small-town sensibilities were being pulled away with it. Every rumble of the engine seemed to echo her own inner turmoil. Despite her attempts to distract herself with the scenery, her thoughts were incessantly drawn back to her seatmate, whose name she hadn't even caught yet. Her initial discomfort had not waned. If anything, it had deepened as the cabin's close quarters reminded her of the unavoidable proximity. She felt a pang of guilt for her unease. It wasn't like her to judge someone so quickly, especially based on nothing but irrational discomfort stirred by unfamiliarity. Her father had always taught her to maintain a cautious distance from those different from her. Yet he had never explicitly defined what different meant. It was an unspoken understanding, a relic of a bygone era that somehow still whispered its outdated prejudices in her ears. The man next to her, seemingly absorbed in his book, exuded a quiet confidence that Sarah couldn't help but notice. His calm demeanor and the occasional notes he scribbled on a sleek tablet contrasted sharply with her restless fidgeting. He appeared so settled, so at ease with the world's diversity that surrounded him, a stark opposite to Sarah's concealed apprehension. As the flight attendants began their service, gliding down the aisles with carts clinking with beverages and snacks, Sarah watched her seatmate more closely. He ordered water with a polite thank you that hinted at a cultured grace. She wondered about his life, what experiences had shaped his open ease, what journeys had brought him such poise and assurance. His existence seemed as far removed from her own as possible, shaped undoubtedly by narratives vastly different from the ones that filled her world. Feeling increasingly foolish for her unfounded fears, Sarah finally mustered the courage to break the ice. "I'm Sarah," she said quietly, her voice slightly shaky. He looked up from his book, offering her a warm smile that seemed to reach his eyes. "David," he replied, extending the courtesy with an effortless charm. His voice was deep but gentle, a soothing sound in the cabin's constant drone. "Nice to meet you, David," Sarah managed to say, though her nerves still fluttered. "Heading to New York for business?" "Actually, for a conference," David responded. "Ima consultan. I work with various international firms to help develop sustainable economic strategies. It's rewarding, but quite demanding." Sarah nodded, impressed despite herself. "That sounds very important." "It has its moments," David admitted, then turned the conversation towards her. "And you, Sarah? What brings you to New York?" "Family visit," she said, softening a bit. "Mais son lives there. It's been too long since I saw him last." As their conversation unfolded, Sarah found herself intrigued by David's perspectives, so different from her own, yet delivered with a sincerity that piqued her curiosity. He spoke of places he'd visited and people he'd met, each story broadening the scope of what she had always assumed the world contained. This unexpected exchange, high above the clouds, was slowly dismantling her prejudices. One word at a time, the dialogue between them grew more comfortable, more fluid. As the initial barriers of apprehension gradually melted away, Sarah began to question not just her assumptions about David, but about all the Davids she had never met, whose stories she had never heard because she had never dared to listen. Each of his stories was a window into a life she could hardly imagine. Each anecdote a lesson in the shared humanity that her small-town existence had never required her to confront. As the plane cruised smoothly at altitude, Sarah felt a shift within herself, a dawning realization that the world was far broader and far more interconnected than her earlier fears had ever allowed her to see. This flight, she slowly understood, wasn't just carrying her across states, but across the boundaries of her own understanding. As the plane pierced through clouds, casting shadows over the vast landscapes below, Sarah found herself immersed in the conversation that was subtly reshaping her worldview. David's stories about his international work highlighted not just the diversity of his experiences, but also the universal threads that connected different cultures and communities. He talked about his efforts in economic development, touching on both successes and struggles. "Every place has its unique challenges," David explained, his voice both reflective and grounded. "But what I've learned is that, at the core, Everyone is striving for the same things: security, prosperity, a better life for their children. It's the approach that differs, shaped by local customs, resources, and histories. Sarah listened, absorbing his words, which echoed much louder than the hum of the aircraft. The depth of the conversation was unexpected but welcome. It was as if a door was opening, one she had long walked past without even realizing it was there. There's something about being so high up here. It puts things into perspective. David continued. Sara. She followed his gaze, looking out at the expanse of sky and earth, a canvas that made her daily concerns seem suddenly trivial. It does, Sarah agreed, her voice a whisper. She felt a shift within herself, a softening of the hard edges of her beliefs. The physical height at which they flew seemed to mirror the metaphorical distance she was traversing from her ingrained preconceptions. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, yet the underlying theme remained, one of discovery and understanding. David asked about her son, and Sarah shared more about her family, revealing the mixture of pride and worry she felt about her son's life in the bustling city so far from her quiet town. New York is a big change from here, I bet, David said with a knowing smile. It is, Sarah replied. I love the peace of my hometown, but I admire the energy and diversity of the city. It's overwhelming but fascinating. As the flight continued, the dialogue between them ebbed and flowed. With each story David shared, Sarah felt a layer of her old self peel away, revealing a curiosity and openness she hadn't felt in years. The journey was no longer just about reaching New York. It was about reaching a new understanding of herself and the world. As the hours passed, the initial discomfort that had clouded Sarah's mind began to dissipate. She found herself laughing at a humorous anecdote David recounted about a misunderstanding during one of his trips abroad. The sound of her own laughter surprised her. It was free, unburdened by the weight of her earlier apprehensions. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a genuine connection with someone whose life was a stark contrast to her own. This connection was no longer defined by differences, but by the shared human experiences of joy, challenge, and the pursuit of understanding. As the plane began its descent into New York, the sunset cast a golden glow over the city skyline, a sight that Sarah observed through the window. The beauty of the moment seemed to encapsulate the transformation she was undergoing. What had started as a routine flight had evolved into a journey of introspection and growth. David turned to her as the seatbelt sign illuminated again, signaling their imminent landing. I hope you enjoy your time in New York. Sarah, it was really enlightening talking with you. Thank you, David, Sarah replied, her voice steady and sincere. This conversation has been a journey in itself. I think I'll see the city, and perhaps many things, differently now. As the wheels touched the runway, Sarah felt a resolve solidifying within her. This trip would be more than just a family visit. It was the beginning of a broader exploration of her own beliefs and the diverse world beyond her familiar borders. She stepped off the plane with a new perspective, ready to embrace the possibilities that awaited, both in the sprawling metropolis of New York and within herself. As Sarah disembarked from the plane and stepped into the bustling terminal of JFK Airport, the sounds and sights of New York City enveloped her. She maneuvered through the crowd, her mind still replaying parts of the conversation with David. Each step seemed lighter than the last, the weight of her previous misconceptions gradually lifting. Navigating through the airport, Sarah felt a fresh sense of openness. She was no longer just visiting her son. She was stepping into a broader world, one she had started to see through a new lens. The city's energy, which once seemed daunting, now invited her with its vibrant diversity and endless possibilities. Her phone buzzed with a message from her son, asking if she had landed safely. She typed back a quick reply, infused with more enthusiasm than before. Just arrived. Excited to see you, she wrote, her heart swelling with anticipation not just for the reunion, but for the new experiences ahead. As she waited for her luggage, Sarah's thoughts returned to David's insights about global communities and the universal desires that bind people together. She felt a growing eagerness to explore New York's myriad neighborhoods, each a tapestry of different cultures and stories. Finally, collecting her bag and heading towards the exit, Sarah felt a renewed confidence. This city, with all its complexity and challenges, was a perfect place to continue the journey of personal growth that had unexpectedly begun thousands of feet above, with a stranger who had become an unwitting mentor. With a deep breath, she stepped out of the airport, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead with a new perspective that would forever change how she viewed not only New York, but her place within the world. The brisk air of New York in autumn greeted Sarah as she exited the terminal. The city's rhythm felt faster, more intense than the tranquility of her southern town. But she was no longer apprehensive. Instead, she felt a sense of curiosity, eager to immerse herself in this new environment and gather experiences that she could have never imagined before. Taking a taxi from the airport to her son's apartment in Manhattan, Sarah watched the cityscape zoom by, the towering skyscrapers, the bustling streets teeming with diverse crowds, and the cacophony of city sounds. Each element of the city's fabric seemed to echo her newfound perspective, encouraging her to look beyond the surface and appreciate the depth of her surroundings. During the ride, Sarah reflected on her earlier reluctance about the trip and how her conversation with David had transformed those feelings into excitement and openness. She realized that her journey on the plane was symbolic of her personal evolution, from apprehension and misunderstanding to understanding and acceptance. As the taxi pulled up to her son's apartment building, Sarah felt a twinge of nervousness about reuniting with her son. They had not seen each other in months, and their last interactions had been strained due to differing views and lifestyles. However, armed with her new insights and perspectives, she felt ready to bridge the gap that had formed between them. She paid the taxi driver, gathered her luggage, and entered the building. The modern, sleek design of the lobby was a stark contrast to the cozy, familiar settings of her home, reflecting the different world her son had embraced in New York. As she waited for the elevator, her heart pounded, not out of fear, but out of anticipation for the conversations and reconciliations that awaited. The elevator dinged, and she pressed the button for her son's floor. As she ascended, Sarah practiced in her mind how she would share her experiences and the changes in her viewpoints, hoping to convey her openness and her desire to understand and connect with her son's urban life. When the elevator doors opened, her son was waiting. He looked older, his features sharper, reflecting the fast-paced city life he had adopted. They hugged a little awkwardly at first, but then with increasing warmth. "Mom, it's great to see you," he said, his voice showing genuine pleasure. Sarah smiled, feeling the barriers of apprehension dissolve. "I'm glad to be here." "Really?" she replied. "I have so much to tell you." As they walked into his apartment, Sarah took in the minimalist decor, so different from her own home, and felt a surge of pride for her son's independence and the life he had built for himself. They sat down, and she began sharing her journey, not just the physical one from the South to New York, but her emotional and mental journey influenced by her encounter with David. Her son listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking questions. It was clear that the gap between them wasn't as wide as Sarah had feared. Their conversation flowed naturally, touching on topics they had previously avoided. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a real connection with her son, one that was not defined by their differences, but by their shared values and the love that had always underpinned their relationship. As the evening turned into night, they continued to talk, the city lights casting a glow through the windows. Sarah knew that this trip would be the start of a new chapter in her life, one where she no longer feared the unknown, but welcomed it with an open heart and mind, ready to learn and grow, and embracing the changes within herself. Sarah realized that she was also embracing her son and his world. The city that never sleeps had awakened something in her, a deep-seated courage to face the future, whatever it might bring, with optimism and an open heart. The next morning, Sarah woke up in her son's guest room. the city sounds drifting in through slightly ajar windows. The conversation from the previous night had left her feeling more connected to her son than she had in years. Over breakfast, they planned the day ahead, deciding to visit some of New York's iconic sites together. As they walked through the bustling streets of Manhattan, Sarah was struck by the energy of the city. Everywhere she looked, there were people from all walks of life, each with their own stories. Remembering David's words about the universal pursuit of happiness and security, she felt a newfound appreciation for the diversity around her. They visited Central Park, where the autumn leaves painted a vivid tableau of change, mirroring Sarah's internal transformation. Sitting on a park bench with a view of the skyline, Sarah shared more about her encounter with David. Her son listened, visibly moved by his mother's openness to new perspectives. "Mom, I'm really proud of you," he said, squeezing her hand. "It sounds like you've come a long way." Sarah smiled, feeling the distance between them shrink even further. "I have," she acknowledged, "and I'm not done yet. I want to keep learning, keep understanding more about the world and myself." The rest of the day passed in a blur of laughter and shared discoveries. As they explored the city together, Sarah's earlier apprehensions about New York faded completely. She embraced every moment, every new experience, as a gift. That evening, as they said their goodbyes at her son's apartment doorstep, Sarah felt a pang of sadness at the thought of leaving, but knew this trip had changed her in profound ways. "I'll be back soon," she promised, hugging her son tightly. "There's so much more for us to share now." Back at the airport, waiting for her flight home, Sarah reflected on her journey. She felt like a different person than the one who had landed in New York just a few days ago. The city, with all its complexity and beauty, had opened her eyes to a wider world, a world she was now eager to explore. As her plane took off, Sarah gazed down at the receding city lights. New York had awakened a new spirit within her, one eager for the next chapter, ready to embrace whatever came her way with an open heart and an eager mind. This wasn't just a trip, it had been a transformation, a true new dawn. As Sarah's plane climbed higher, leaving the luminous expanse of New York City behind, she leaned back in her seat, a sense of peace enveloping her. The flight home felt different from her journey to New York. She was no longer the woman who viewed the world through the narrow lens of her small-town upbringing. Her time in the city, her conversations with her son, and her introspective exchanges with David had broadened her perspective immeasurably. Sarah reflected on the personal growth she had experienced in just a few days. She had walked the streets of New York with a curiosity that was once foreign to her. Each neighborhood's vibrant culture and the kaleidoscope of people she had encountered reinforced the lessons David had imparted on their flight. At the core, all people share the same hopes and challenges, despite the vast diversity of their backgrounds. She thought about the conversations with her son, how they had delved into topics that once would have made her uncomfortable. These discussions had not only bridged the gap between them, but had also ignited a desire in Sarah to continue exploring and understanding more diverse viewpoints and lifestyles. In the quiet of the cabin, with the hum of the engines in the background, Sarah made a few resolutions. First, she would return to New York to visit her son more frequently, not out of obligation, but from a genuine desire to be part of his world and to experience more of the city's dynamic environment. Second, she resolved to bring some of the openness and acceptance she had embraced back to her community. She wanted to share the beauty of diversity and the importance of empathy with her friends and neighbors, perhaps even challenging some of the outdated notions that still lingered there. Lastly, Sarah decided to keep seeking out new experiences that would challenge her, whether by traveling more, attending cultural events, or simply engaging in conversations with people whose lives were different from her own. She understood now that growth came from stepping outside one's comfort zone and embracing the unknown. As the flight attendant passed by, offering a blanket, Sarah declined with a smile. She felt warmed by her own inner changes and the memories of her trip. Looking out the window at the stars dotting the night sky, she felt small in the vastness of the universe, yet significant in her new purpose. Sarah's journey back home was not just a return, but a step forward into a future where she would no longer be a bystander to change, but an active participant in creating a more inclusive and understanding world. She was ready for whatever challenges and joys this new chapter might bring, confident that the journey was just beginning. Landing back in her hometown, the familiar sights and slower pace welcomed Sarah with a gentle embrace. The contrast between her quiet southern town and the bustling vibrancy of New York was stark. Yet Sarah no longer felt confined by the small-town boundaries. Instead, she saw her return as an opportunity to bring a piece of the broader perspective she had gained back to her community. Stepping off the plane, Sarah felt grounded, yet invigorated by the transformative experiences of her trip. As she made her way through the small airport, she greeted her neighbors and friends with a newfound warmth and a smile that reflected her inner changes. The drive home through tree-lined streets gave Sarah time to plan. She thought about starting a book club or a discussion group at the local library to share stories and insights about different cultures and global issues. She wanted to foster a sense of curiosity and openness in her community, much like the openness she had experienced in New York. Arriving home, Sarah felt a sense of comfort, but also a drive to enact change. She spent the evening sorting through photographs and notes from her trip, each image and scribble a reminder of her journey's lessons. She drafted emails to several community leaders proposing new cultural awareness initiatives, her words infused with the passion and conviction she had absorbed during her travels. The next morning, Sarah visited her local coffee shop, where she shared her experiences with the owner, a longtime friend. Her enthusiasm was contagious, sparking interest in other patrons who overheard her stories. Encouraged by their curiosity, Sarah organized the first meeting of what she hoped would become a regular cultural exchange forum. Weeks passed, and Sarah's efforts began to bear fruit. The community responded positively to her initiatives, with increasing attendance and engagement at each event. Local schools started to incorporate more diverse materials into their curriculums. Inspired by the program Sarah had introduced, Asotom Deepin, Sarah planned a small festival celebrating various cultures represented in her town and nearby areas. The event featured music, food, and art from around the world, bringing the community together in a vibrant display of unity and learning. Through these activities, Sarah found a new purpose. She felt connected not only to her son and the wider world, but also to her neighbors, who were beginning to embrace the beauty of diversity and the richness of global perspectives. Looking back on the year since her trip to New York, Sarah was amazed at the changes in her life and community. What began as a simple visit to see her son had evolved into a profound journey of growth and advocacy. She had not only changed her view of the world, she had become an instrumental force in transforming others' views as well. As winter approached, Sarah reflected on her journey with gratitude. She knew there was still much to learn and many challenges ahead, but she felt equipped and eager to face them head-on. The world had become smaller in her eyes, yet her dreams and aspirations for herself and her community had grown immensely. With each new project and each new conversation, Sarah was helping to weave a tapestry of understanding that she hoped would endure for generations to come. As the year drew to a close, the impact of Sarah's efforts continued to ripple through her community. The cultural festival had become a quarterly event, each one larger and more diverse than the last. Sarah watched with pride as people from different backgrounds came together, shared their stories, and celebrated their differences. The community that had once seemed so homogeneous was now blossoming into a mosaic of varied human experiences and connections. The new year brought with it a renewed sense of purpose for Sarah. Her role as a community bridge builder had given her life a new dimension. She started a local newsletter, which highlighted stories of cultural integration and global awareness. Each issue shared success stories from the town's cultural initiatives and highlighted upcoming events and educational opportunities. It wasn't long before the newsletter garnered interest from neighboring towns, and Sarah was invited to speak at regional conferences about community building and diversity education. One cold January morning, Sarah received a call from her son, who had been keeping up with his mother's activities from afar. He expressed his admiration and pride in her accomplishments. "Mom, you're really making a difference," he said, his voice filled with emotion. You've inspired not just your town, but me as well. I've been thinking about starting something similar here in New York." Sarah felt her heart swell with joy. Not only had she managed to change her own perspectives, but she had also inspired her son to take up the mantle of change in his own way. This was more than she could have hoped for, and it reinforced her commitment to her work. Inspired by her son's words and encouraged by the support of her community, Sarah decided to expand her initiatives. She collaborated with local schools to develop a program that would connect students with international pen pals. The program aimed to foster global understanding from a young age, encouraging kids to explore new cultures and build friendships across borders. As spring arrived, Sarah organized the town's first Global Understanding Day, which featured guest speakers from around the world, workshops on global issues, and a craft fair with handmade items from dozens of countries. The event was a tremendous success, attracting attention from local media and educational leaders from other districts who were interested in replicating the model. Through these efforts, Sarah saw her community transform. Long-held biases were challenged, and new friendships were formed. The town became a model for cultural integration and education, with other communities reaching out to learn from its success. Looking back on her journey, Sarah realized that the seeds for all this growth had been planted during her transformative trip to New York and her life-changing conversation with David on the plane. Her story had come full circle, from personal transformation to community impact. As she prepared for the next Global Understanding Day, Sarah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had not only broadened her own horizons, but had also opened the world to her community. Her journey of change had taught her that one person's shift in perspective could indeed alter the fabric of an entire community. With each new day, Sarah was eager to continue this work, forever grateful for the flight that had changed everything and for the ongoing journey of discovery it had sparked. As summer approached, the vibrant energy in Sarah's town was palpable. The initiatives she had spearheaded were now part of the community's fabric, woven into everyday conversations and local traditions. People eagerly anticipated each cultural festival, which had grown to include more countries and offered deeper insights into global customs and traditions. Sarah's newsletter had evolved into a community blog, featuring contributors from various backgrounds who shared their experiences and taught readers about their cultures. One sunny afternoon, Sarah sat in her garden, reflecting on the path she had traveled. She thought about David, the stranger who had sparked so much change in her life. She wondered how he was doing and hoped that he might see the ripple effects of that one conversation they had shared in the skies above. With a sense of gratitude, she decided to reach out to him through a thank you note, hoping to convey the profound impact he had had on her and her community. A few weeks later, Sarah received a reply from David. He was thrilled to learn about the transformations in her town and expressed his admiration for her dedication to spreading cultural awareness and understanding. He shared that he had continued his work as a consultant, often sharing the story of their conversation as an example of how seemingly small interactions can lead to significant outcomes. The exchange rekindled Sarah's appreciation for serendipitous encounters and their potential to change lives. It also reminded her that her journey was far from over. It was merely shifting into new phases with new challenges and opportunities. As the community's cultural ambassador, Sarah organized an annual Day of Gratitude, where the town came together to celebrate its achievements and plan for the future. During the event, Sarah gave a speech, sharing her story from the beginning, her apprehensions, her transformative trip to New York, and the invaluable lessons she learned from a stranger. She emphasized the power of open-mindedness and the importance of embracing diversity. The day was filled with music, laughter, and a collective sense of accomplishment. Children played in makeshift tents representing different countries, while adults engaged in discussions about future projects and new cultural learning opportunities. As the sun set on the Day of Gratitude, Sarah felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had not only transformed her own views, but had also ignited a spark of change in her community. Her story was a testament to the idea that anyone, regardless of their background or age, could make a difference in the world. With the stars beginning to twinkle in the evening sky, Sarah made her way home, her heart full of hope and her mind buzzing with ideas for the future. She knew that the road ahead would be filled with both challenges and triumphs, but she was ready to face them with the same courage and openness that had guided her thus far. As she closed her eyes that night, Sarah felt a deep connection to the wider world and a commitment to continue her journey of learning, sharing, and growing. Her story had begun with a simple flight to New York, but had blossomed into a lifelong mission to foster understanding and connection. As she drifted off to sleep, she was already dreaming of new horizons to explore, confident that each new day would bring more opportunities to learn and to love a little more about the beautiful, diverse world around her. Thank you for watching and joining us on this heartfelt journey of transformation and understanding. This story reminds us of the profound impact a single interaction can have in breaking barriers and fostering unity. We hope it inspires you to approach life with empathy and openness, embracing the diversity that makes our world so beautiful. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the soul and encourage us all to make a difference.